Hello, my name is Nick Leonard, and I have too many mics. Today we're going to be talking about vocal recording, speech for video, for podcasts, and anything else you might desire recording your voice for. So we're going to talk a little bit about mics and some pointers on technique. And I've got a lot of mics here, and it's a little excessive, but it's for your benefit, I hope. I want to get the most important stuff out of the way first for those who may not watch the whole video, starting with pops. This is a big problem. Unfortunately, it's a very basic thing. And hopefully all of you are smart enough to know this, but I see this all the time. I hear it rather in a lot of circumstances, even with people who speak into microphones for a living frequently. Don't speak directly into the microphone. Even if it has a pop filter, you don't know that those P's aren't getting right through the pop filter, especially if you're right up on the microphone. It still won't fix your problem 100% of the time. Especially if you don't have a pop filter, you're going to have a very bad time. And with a podium mic, you don't need to grab it and speak into it. I know you want to get your point across, but please just let the mic do its job. Where should we put the microphones? How close should they be? As I said before, avoid speaking directly into the capsule. That way our breath can go through and not into the capsule, the microphone, making a big plosive sound. Even with a pop filter, let's stick to 45 degrees off axis. It's perfectly fine and gets the microphone out of the way of your face if you're shooting video. A dynamic microphone is usually going to be placed closer to you. A condenser is more sensitive, so it can be further away from your talent, which is you. You're talented. Think about it. Something like a shotgun microphone is designed to be placed further away, maybe on top of a camera or hanging above you, pointing towards you. In general, you want to be as close as you're comfortable with to the microphone. You're going to get less room noise. You're going to get a better sound. Now, for a video, you may not want to be up in the microphone all the time. That's understandable. But if you're recording a vocal for something else, then there's nothing wrong with being up close to the microphone. You're going to get more proximity effect, which means more added bass. Unless you're in a perfectly treated studio, you're going to get a lot of room noise if you're too far away from your microphone. And if you're trying to get your mic out of the shot, you may deal with a lot of room noise, and that's not going to sound too good. So instead, have the microphone closer, or get something like a shotgun microphone that has better rejection and will give you less of that room noise. However, with a shotgun microphone, you're still going to need some room treatment. Whatever you can do to minimize room noise is a good idea. Some of that comes down to placement, and some of that is room treatment. Now, this is not a perfectly treated room, so there's certainly enough reflection if I'm far away from the microphone. So I just fix that by generally being closer to my microphone and maybe doing a little EQ to help cut down on some of those reflections. But once they're there, there's not much you can do. So to recap, don't speak directly into the microphone and don't be way too close or way too far away. Good rule of thumb is probably 4 to 8 inches. There are 3 main types of microphones: dynamic, condenser, and ribbon. Now, we're not going to worry about ribbon microphones. They're not really all that applicable for this scenario. We've got dynamic and we've got condenser. Dynamic microphones are more common in radio and podcasts. The Shure SM7B is the #1 podcast microphone that you've seen all over the place. The Electro Voice RE20 is another classic radio and lesser popular podcast microphone. A condenser mic, which is hard to see on this backdrop, is going to be a lot more sensitive. It's great at miking things further away. It's great for acoustic instruments. It's a popular choice for singing when it comes to music, and it is used also in YouTube plenty of times, especially shotgun microphones. So a shotgun microphone is a type of condenser. A polar pattern is how sensitive the microphone is in what direction. And most microphones are cardioid, which means it picks up sound from the front as well as the sides, though less on the sides. A hypercardioid is more focused towards right in front of it, and a supercardioid or a shotgun mic is even more focused. So shotgun mic is great for distances where you want to point the mic directly at a source and ignore everything else around it, but you want the mic further away, or it has to be further away. They're good for live events like sports, as well as a popular choice for videos where you don't want the microphone in the shot and you still want a nice, clear, recording. I don't own a shotgun mic, so I can't demonstrate here, but if you want something that's out of the shot and you don't want a microphone in the frame, a shotgun is a good choice. Another good choice if you don't want a microphone that's very visible is a lapel mic. And this is just a little dynamic clip-on lapel mic. This is a cheap one. These were from Power Device. I think it was about 2 for $40, and they're nice enough for that price. It's a pretty cheap microphone. I think they sound pretty decent, and it goes directly into my camera, so I can easily record audio that way. I don't really use that for my YouTube stuff here, but I have used it if I want to shoot something on location. It's good to have a microphone that doesn't require power. I stick it right into the camera, the audio's there, and it's a lot cleaner than using the onboard camera mic. So lapel mics are a good choice if you want a more stealthy microphone, but it may not sound as good as a dynamic or a condenser that is properly positioned. Another consideration is that a dynamic microphone doesn't require additional power to use it, whereas a condenser requires 48 volt phantom power. Now that's standard on just about any mixer, any audio interface, but it's not standard on a camera necessarily. And if you're out on location somewhere, you may not have access to phantom power. A dynamic microphone doesn't have that issue. Now, a dynamic microphone is much quieter, so it's going to require more preamp gain in order to bring the levels up. So that's another consideration. Condenser may require power, but it's much louder. If you're working digitally and your levels are too low, that's okay. The level you record at isn't as crucial. As long as you've got a decent signal, you can boost it up in post, and it's not really going to affect the quality like it would in an analog situation. Which is also to say you don't necessarily need the world's best preamps, though I'm sure people who've spent a lot of money on preamps will tell you that you do. So if this is your first microphone or you're looking to upgrade to something more professional, what do I recommend? I would recommend a dynamic mic if you're primarily going to be recording speech, because it's going to have better rejection of outside noise, and chances are you don't live in a vocal booth, and most of us don't. So a dynamic mic is going to have better noise performance in terms of rejecting outside sounds. A dynamic is also going to be less neutral and give you more of a sound, a particular sound. If you like listening to podcasts or radio, then you're probably going to like the sound of a dynamic mic. I think it sounds a little more polished, a little more finished. Yeah, it's not as neutral. Now, a condenser is going to be a lot more neutral, and you may prefer that sound, and that's perfectly fine too. But be aware that they do pick up everything quite a bit more than a dynamic will. So any environmental noise, any room tone is going to be more obvious with a condenser, and especially if you're using it to record yourself further away because you like the extra sensitivity that a condenser provides, and you want to record yourself a few feet away from the microphone, you're going to start to get a lot of the room noise. Now, I think everyone should own a Shure SM57, and no, I have no affiliation with them. I just love the mic personally, but it's a great mic. It's a classic mic. It's an industry standard. It's, to me, the best sounding mic, or at least the most neutral and normal sounding mic when it comes to guitar cabs, when it comes to snare drums. The SM58 is the best selling vocal microphone of all time. And it's the same capsule that goes in the 57. They just have a different design. The 57 is more geared towards instruments, but you can buy a nice pop filter for it, and it works just as well as a vocal microphone. I prefer the look of the 57 with this pop filter, which is the A2WS pop filter. I think the SM58 just looks too much like a stage microphone and kind of generic to want to use it in a video for my taste, but it's the same capsule, and it's the same capsule that goes in the SM7B, which, as mentioned, is the top microphone for podcasts and radio. It's a classic microphone as well, and it has the same capsule. It just doesn't have a transformer. So the SM7B is quieter, which makes it a worse choice for most people because it's 4 times as expensive and less practical. So just get yourself a 57. It's the world's best microphone. You heard it here. I'm not opening this up for debate, okay? I have this other one here, which I did a video on recently, which is the Fifine K669D. This is a good budget choice, I think. It's got a solid build, and it comes in at under $40. Is it the best microphone under $50. I don't know. I haven't tried them all, but it's not a bad microphone. I don't think it sounds as nice as a 57, but it works fine, and it's a decent vocal microphone. It's got a solid build, and it looks good. So I like that. If you can't afford a 57, which is $100, this is only $38, $37, and it sounds pretty good. So that's an option if you don't have $100. But I'd really, again, recommend the 57 because it's a microphone you can use your whole life. And if you're doing other kind of recording, if you're recording guitar, if you're recording snare, it's going to be a great microphone that you'll be happy you have, and you'll never regret it. You'll find a use for it. As far as condensers go, there are so many options, and you can get some really cheap ones up to some very, very expensive ones. And you're going to be cutting some corners up until about maybe $150. That's when you might start getting into a true large diaphragm territory, which is the main type that you would use up close for vocals, is a large diaphragm condenser. As I said, there's shotgun microphones. Those also tend to be, starting around $200 or so for some of the cheaper ones. I'm sure there's some really budget stuff, but I would tend to stay away from super budget condensers. If you're looking for something really cheap as far as condensers go, the MXL stuff is not bad. I've used the 990 for years, and it's a pretty good mic. It's not the lowest noise floor. It's not the best sounding, but for $50, the MXL 990 is a solid mic, and you do have the option to upgrade the capsule later on down the road and turn it into an actually nice mic, which is a pretty easy process. That's a nice thing with condensers. You can modify them relatively simply. You can't really with a dynamic, but you can swap capsules on a condenser as long as it's compatible, which means it has to be something that's not an electret. A condenser with an electret capsule will not be a candidate for upgrading to a large diaphragm capsule. So it has to be something that's at least a small diaphragm condenser or a large diaphragm condenser if you want to go the route of upgrading later, which may sound scary if you don't do electronics. I wouldn't recommend it for everyone. It's a bit fiddly, but it's really pretty easy. It requires a few tiny screws and 2 wires, so you don't have to be a great soldering expert, but you do have to have steady hands and be okay with careful stuff. It's like working on a watch, but not that bad. This is the Stellar X2. I like it as far as the mics I own. It's about $200. It's a very clear and neutral sounding mic that I like for that purpose. I have a 990 that I modified with a K47 capsule, which is more of a vintage style. I think you can get the X2 Vintage, which also has that kind of capsule. There are several main styles of large diaphragm condenser capsules that you can learn about and select for different purposes if you get into modifying microphones or you just want to be shopping for the right kind of mic for your purposes. There's great talk by Matt McGlynn on it. I don't want to go too down that rabbit hole, but it is interesting stuff, I think. Audio-Technica has lots of popular condensers that aren't too expensive, like the AT2020. They have a lot of microphones and plenty of good stuff out there, so that's a good place to look too. So next up, let's take a look at how I process my vocals and how I deliver the final sound to a video. So now you can see my raw audio from this video. Yeah, the total runtime here before editing is 45 minutes. That's pretty typical. And I kind of hate video editing because I talk too much. Then I have to go back through all that and cut it down to about 10 minutes, which means cutting out like 75% of it. But don't worry, a lot of it's just me saying the same thing worse and then saying the same thing again, but better. So here's my standard vocal chain. It does kind of grow and evolve over time, and I always do some manual tweaking before I just render the file. So I do listen and I do check over it, and I always tweak and try to improve things as I'm going. But this is the basic idea. I've got a noise gate first, and this is to cut out any unwanted background noise. You can see I've got it set up at a point where if I'm not speaking, it's below the threshold, but it's pretty sensitive, so it opens right up when I make any noise at all, because otherwise it can start to sound like too chopped up if you've got too aggressive. If I pull this way up, and especially if I turn that down. Well, now you can't hear me at all. So if it sounds really choppy, then your noise gate is up too high. And we need to bring down the threshold so that you can hear all of your words and all of your sounds. This range knob tells it how loud the audio is when it's below the threshold. So if I have this at 0 dB, it's like the noise gate isn't doing anything at all. And if I enable it and bypass it, you hear it doesn't do anything. So in order to make it quieter, I would turn this down. Could go to -6, -10. Now when the signal is below the threshold, it's going to be -10 dB quieter than it is normally. So your range controls the level of muting. You can go to -infinity, which will give you complete silence between all your words, but I think it's a little more natural and a little less jarring for people wearing headphones to keep it at a level of maybe -12 to -6. So we'll leave it there. The attack and release time will also affect some of the smoothness of the gating. You can play around with these. I've got the attack set at 1 millisecond and the release at 150. So it doesn't have a super fast release, and it does have some attack time so that it has a smooth enough attack and it's not too choppy. That's the goal. I also use Bertum's denoiser, and this is a great plugin that I should update. But this acts kind of as a second noise gate, though it's not really gating so much as attenuating some of these frequencies and just making them quieter when the signal is not present. And this one is a little more sensitive, you can see, but also not attenuating as much. Now, if I turn this off, you can hear it is actually cutting out a fair amount of noise, and especially if I stop talking. You can hear the denoiser is doing a fair bit, but I find that this combination of two is a little more natural. It's not necessary. You could run with one noise gate, but the denoiser is a free plugin, and just about any DAW or video editing software has some kind of noise gate built in. So it's worth testing out. It's a fun one. I know some people like it on guitar as well, which is cool, and I still need to try that out. The next thing I've got here is a compressor, and you can really use any kind of compressor you want. I happen to like this plugin. Doesn't really matter. But I am compressing this quite a bit, and that is going to give me a lot of compression and keep my voice relatively level throughout a video. If I'm a little further away from a mic or a little closer, it's not going to have a huge effect on the volume, though it will affect the tone. In order to keep the compression sounding more natural, I like to go for a very fast release time so that you don't hear the noise being compressed for very long after I stop speaking, and a more medium attack time so that it's not overly aggressive sounding. I used to be a little more scared to overdo the compression, but now I think you can pretty much get away with almost anything when it comes to compression on voice, whether it's singing or voiceover. If it sounds way too unnatural, dial it back, but you can compress quite a bit before it really sounds unnatural, or unnatural in a bad way. Maybe it doesn't sound extremely realistic, but does it sound good? EQ is the most dangerous element, though you shouldn't be scared of it, but it's the easiest to make big mistakes with it and to go overboard. One thing that I would say applies to any microphone and any recording is getting rid of some of these lows. Anything about 100 hertz and below, you can safely roll off of a vocal. This will reduce low-end noise, and if someone has a subwoofer, it's not going to be rumbling away with the crazy low stuff going on in a microphone, or wind, or ambient sound. So just get rid of anything under 100 hertz. That's safe for any microphone and any vocal. Even in music, you don't need that stuff. Get rid of it. You can see here I've got a couple of tactical cuts, and I could certainly go further with this. If I boost this signal up here, I can get more of a nasal, boxy tone. Good if I want a more old-timey radio presenter voice. If I go way too far with some of these, though, it might sound good initially, but I'm going to get this very scooped out sound. And on certain systems, it's just not going to play back well. Or if you make a certain cut, it can lend to a really weird sound. So go easy on your cuts. I know this microphone can be a little bit peaky in this region. I could take this down somewhat. And sometimes you can make a pretty drastic cut without it sounding weird. And sometimes it sounds weird if you make even a small cut. So listen and maybe monitor on multiple devices and see what works for you. Play around with it. It depends a lot on your microphone, your voice, your position, and EQ is something I like to take a listen to and play around with on every video and just check where I'm sitting and if I'm happy with how it's sounding. You can add some high frequencies for more top-end boost if you want, but you might want to keep them in the upper area range because we start going down here into the mids. You'll again get that slightly more nasally sound, which can be good for audibility and intelligibility, but is not maybe the most flattering sound. And if we go way overboard, it starts to sound unnatural and kind of harsh and bright. So a little bit of air is not a bad thing. It also will bring up some of your background noise. So it's another trade-off. I can see for some reason, and I suspect it's some kind of interference. I've got a very, very tight band up here of some kind of noise that I could get rid of. I'm going to suspect that's maybe some kind of electrical interference. If you have an EQ where you can see the waveform, you can try to look for areas that are consistently peaky or that are look too scooped out that you might want to address. And sometimes you can do some visual EQ. Of course, use your ears, but it's not a bad idea to look at it too and say, well, we've got a big peak here, and I don't think I want that region to be super peaky. So I'd rather make small moves and small improvements with EQ than try to totally fix the signal. If you recorded it badly, there may be nothing you can do. There may be nothing you can do on certain mics to eliminate things that you don't like about them. So you can get creative, you can get experimental, but you can also destroy your audio. And it's probably better to use the less is more principle with EQ. The last thing I've got here is just a limiter. Again, stock Reaper limiter, and it's doing as much as maybe 6 dB, but usually less. And that is, again, just to tame my voice, keep it really consistent, and make sure I'm not going over my limit while boosting up the overall volume. Limiters are also generally quite transparent, hopefully, so you shouldn't hear the limiting unless you go really super overboard with it. So you don't want to necessarily brick wall your vocal audio, but if the goal is consistency and intelligibility, translation into smaller things like cell phone speakers and earbuds, then it's a good idea to have pretty consistent levels and a nice healthy signal in there. So that's my whole vocal chain. It's very simple. I don't do anything fancy. You could certainly do more. The main difference between any other mics I'm going to use, I'm just going to look at my threshold on my compressor, make sure it's compressing as much as I want, not too much. And I'm going to check out the EQ and kind of dial in fresh EQ for every kind of mic based on, well, how it sounds and what I like or don't like about it. Well, I hope this has been useful to you. If you learned anything, don't forget to smash like, smash subscribe, smash all the buttons, hit the notifications or whatever. I don't care. Just, leave a comment, say hi. That would be great. And come to my Discord and hang out there. It's a fun place. So see you in the next video.